Hey, Clemens, just getting set up here.
Hey, John, how are you?
Good, thanks for coming. I have to get better about one thing, which is pre-announcing these. But give me 1 second while I set up the YouTube live stream. Oops. And one last thing here. Okay, everybody, it's good to see you. Welcome to a new episode of the Baseline Protocol Office Hours. Happens every week, 12 p.m. on Wednesdays, U.S. Eastern. And I'll just keep on keeping an eye on attendees showing up. This is the chance for us to not only talk about, but record and answer questions and get this on the recording for YouTube so that people can find out more about being involved with Baseline Protocol. This is a practical conversation in free form where we can talk about anything you want to talk about. If you're having trouble getting onto any particular practical things like getting into the GitHub, working with issues, working with pull requests and branches and other things that you might be wanting to get involved with or confused about where key work is going on or who's involved with it. And also we usually try to bring in a celebrity guest like Mr. Clemens Juan. So it's nice to see you from Consensus, who's really one of the best architects I know, and a communicating architect, somebody who really can explain things well. And of course, Consensus is one of the companies involved with the Baseline Protocol and has a lot of products like Infura and Pegasus and Codify, which is asset management, and in infrastructure, which is really what Consensus, I think in a nutshell, is all about these days, is being an infrastructure company, getting you access to public blockchain, as well as enterprise blockchains as well. Pegasus can handle both, and Infura getting you out of the mainnet, and Codify handling your assets, like tokenizing an invoice. So Clemens, in a minute, we can maybe talk about that. And let me see who's in here. So we've got Boris, we've got Andre, we've got Bob, we've got Nick, and we usually have people trickle in, and a lot of people wind up going onto the YouTube video. So Nick, you do the honors again of keeping an eye on the YouTube.
I'm on it.
That'd be great. Right, so Clemens, before we get started on that, does anybody have questions so far? Practical, theoretical?
I do have like one or two questions maybe. As far as microservices, and I've been reading a bit about Baseline. What is the best way to source? Like, how do you where can I read up on it, or how is baseline, how microservices are being used, how to code it, or just how to learn how to code it?
It's a great question. In baseline, I know Clemens probably can give you a PhD thesis on microservices
Okay.
and distributed system architecture.
Yeah, that would be great.
In general, I think I hope this is a satisfying answer. We can go into it more if you'd like, which is, and I think Brian is a person on my team who was instrumental in creating the baseline protocol, and he's really big on distributed systems architecture. Brian Chamberlain, he was on last week, and clearly the protocol itself is being designed with microservices is a charged term because it means very specific things, but certainly it is a componentized architecture, right? So messaging service is a messaging service, and it has works via a bus with the rest of the services, right? With digital signatures and and of course that allows you to decide what messaging service you're going to use. You could use Nats, you could use Clemens, I think, used to work with Corda. You could even use Corda. I've been promoting the idea of using Corda flows, partly because I think it'd be hilarious to say that Ethereum had absorbed Corda into its stack. But in general, I think it's actually a pretty good messaging layer, right? It's very point to point. It's good with long polling. It's elegant. So whatever messaging protocol you're using, it should be able to plug in. And so modularity is important. Does that answer part of your question? Would you like to do
Yes, it does. It does. So in the scenarios you described, a microservice is equal to a messaging service.
Well, that would be one service.
That
right?
would be one service.
Yeah, and you shouldn't hard code it into the protocol. Otherwise, the protocol becomes a platform and a hard coded platform. And we're trying to make this a technique, not a platform product. I always say this, right? Not a platform, not a product, not a coin, a token, a scheme.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
So it's a technique. As a technique, you need to have a modular approach.
Okay.
I have a visualization of, if I could share my screen, I can show kind of just generic tech components. And I drew this from referencing the open source documentation. Could I be granted screen sharing?
Oh, do I have to grant you now?
I
Absolutely. All panelists who can share. There we go.
Yeah, so here, just at very high level generic components. The secure messaging is mostly off-chain, so you have to configure this. But in terms of what EY and Unibright has built is kind of up here. So you have multiple baseline instances. And the first thing you have to do is create a work group, which is the identity of those entities communicating with each other. That would on-chain translate to some on-registry contract. But also on top of that, you have to set up your workflows, you have to create your business logic, use the libraries that were written, and that goes into either the shield or verifier contract for sharing proofs. But the on-chain components are in blue, and then everything else above that is off-chain, dependent on how you configure your ERP system to use these services.
That's right. And in the long run, it would be, I think Nirvana for more and more traditional systems like SAP and Oracle and Dynamics and Mongo and middleware systems like Boomi and others to just say, yeah, we're baselineable, meaning that those components are already in the product and you just use them. So that's what we mean by it's not, baseline isn't the product. That's why I like to say baselining rather than baseline. Baseline sounds like a product. It sounds like a really good name for a product. And in fact, it's not a product. It's it's techniques. So the product is your product. So using these techniques and enabling your system to do these techniques, which is effectively just a traditional, right, Clemens? It's a traditional loose coupling distributed architecture pattern, using the mainnet in such a way that you aren't really giving up sensitive information or metadata or trace data to the mainnet for competitors or bad guys or somebody to observe or generate classifiers on and figure out what your business activities or your relationships are. Would you
Yeah.
characterize it that way?
I drew one more diagram just to share is the kind of evolution of patterns with business process management in general, where kind of early days you would have your simplicity of just kind of hashing data on mainnet or any blockchain. So you have an anchor, you receive a hash, you request other systems to check the hash for the proof, and then you use that kind of as a lightweight to link. Other parties then evolved into building their own permissioned consortium blockchains where you have separate databases that keep that private data. There may be transaction chains, so ability to prove the provenance of the changes of your asset or of your any type of business process change. But then I think the interesting part of this baselining protocol is it allows you to the things that you have to implement first is that they must be running the same protocol and those systems must be communicating the same standards. So you have to first generate your commitments and generate your proofs, but you also have to set up this working group, this work group on mainnet. So that registrar and identity is just as important as the things that you're communicating and the proofs that you're communicating between.
But it is plastic, right? And that are flexible and that you can add to a work group. Well, I mean, in a mature instance of the protocol, you'll be able to add to a work group. That shouldn't be a problem. And what I like is being able to compartmentalize down to a work step, who's aware of something, and yet being able to integrate work steps in the future, workflows going forward, because you're not on different substrates. You're on the mainnet, right? So you can take a baseline work group, work step number 22, and integrate it with another work group, work step number 33. And as long as they're logically compatible, you should be able to pass parameters and maintain that continuity and the assurance of consistency between those records. And I like that idea because you don't have to call a network administrator. Yeah.
Clemens, this is Andre. If you go back to your layered architecture, where you have mentioned the public and also permission blockchain as the lowest layer, is the idea that you also can use baselining protocol as an alternative to the ordering service for some of the permission networks, or what that public or permissioned statement mean there?
It just means that you can connect to contracts that represent. It's not on the node layer. This is still on the smart contract layer. On the node layer, you can connect to either a public mainnet or if there's the identity of the new network and either whatever contracts you're running privately, or it's just a Kaleido network, for example, would be a permission network. And you can deploy the same contracts on there.
In fact, I suspect that'll happen a lot as people start going in the enterprise, setting these things up to test on a private permission group, and then flipping the switch to deploy to mainnet when you are confident that it's working correctly. Seems to make a lot of sense.
Clemens, question: what is the code book? How does that come into the picture? Is that it seems to be like I guess the logic or some logic that will exist on the mainnet in some form. Is that?
I'm not familiar with the code book, but it sounds like that business logic section, the set of libraries, the set of proofs that you can write. I mean, the proofs are also very specific. So most proofs, if you look at Aztec and the way that they've represented the proofs, I think it's pretty telling. It shows the way to generate the proof and then only share either true or false for ranged proofs, or if values are true or values are available. I can share that with you. I'll do a quick lookup and share that. But
while you're looking that up, I'll say Aztec is involved, Nightfall is involved. There's some really great crypto folks. So there was a great, if you're looking at the SSC meeting from Monday, which got like 1,300 views in just a few hours. It's crazy. It passed the Ethereum Foundation's core dev call views, which I was like, wow, that's cool, because that's a pretty good call. There's a great section by Hadassah Alberter about their benchmarking of different methods of getting those circuits through. But there's two kinds of circuits. One is in the new init core branch, there's a generalized sort of consistency check circuit, which you could use for any work step. You can just say, yep, this thing and this SAP system and this Oracle or this dynamic system got the same record, did the same thing with the same record, and deterministically generated the same result. I don't know what that is. I don't know anything about it. And I'm not checking for correctness. It's just consistency. And that's nice because it's repeatable and simple. So you can just grab that particular library and go boom, boom, boom. And you have that circuit over and over and over again. It's repeatable. But then if you're, say, a regulator or an auditor, you can develop and publish a library of circuits that are specific that say, we're going to give you a lot less trouble about your audit if you do all your transactions with your counterparties through these circuits, because then we know for sure that they were all done correctly in that particular context. Doesn't mean that you're perfect. There's a lot of off-chain or off-data things that they'd still have to audit you about, but it would really make their lives a lot simpler. They wouldn't have to do batch sampling of your transactions to figure out whether you did any naughty things or incorrect things. That's a really exciting idea, and one that deserves the effort of developing these circuits, which do take time and effort, and use fairly sophisticated people have to do them. So in general, you want something that's repeatable, like the consistency machine, and then you can add to it. Also, it's the code book, which we were asking before. That was sort of our term for a code package, right? So you can serialize some data, but you can also serialize, you could write a function, or Lambda function, or you could write a function in Python. And as long as both or all the counterparties execute the code correctly in the same way and correctly, and get the same result, then you're going to maintain consistency, even though none of that happened on chain. The circuit that we're talking about that is in the Radish 34 demo, that circuit is specific to checking the correctness of a rate table in a discount structure, discounting rate table. And it says things like the rates have to be contiguous. You can't have any gaps between the rates. So it's a little bit like a Java interface. So these kinds of ZK circuits are like almost like a Java interface. They enforce correctness. They enforce a certain set of rules. Clemens, I'm sorry I took the floor from you on some things.
It's okay. That's good. I'm just looking for those slides. The Aztec team did a presentation at Sibos last year. I was just trying to find them.
Yeah, they're starting to get really heavily involved. And it's nice seeing the different ZK teams working together, like the Nightfall team at Ernst & Young and Aztec, and people like Zach and also the Zoc folks and others. So Clemens, did you? By the way, I love that slide of your of the progression from proof of existence to more sophisticated anchoring, which is sort of emblematic of some work that Consensus has been doing for several years now, like in consortia like Comgo and Covantis. And in fact, some of the work that we're doing in Baseline is the brainchild of people like Mano Sami, who is a genius, and gave us a lot of good ideas about how to do the architecture for baselining. So do you want to, and then of course the proof of consistency, which is where we go with baselining. What would you say are the connection points with, so say, for example, Codify? One of the big tentpole projects this summer is asset management of a baselined invoice. All right, so basically factoring an invoice that has been baselined. And there's some speculation that a cool endpoint for that would be Codify. You have any thoughts on that?
Yes, I have more slides. Yeah, so I don't know, for those who don't know about Codify, but or at least consensus internally, we've been developing our own kind of product suite instead of stacks. So let me just share what that looks like. And we've presented this in previous webinars, but consensus has product principles to build the infrastructure tools to help enterprises build faster and more reliably. And so we are now MetaMask plus Infura on the mainnet side, but these can also interact with Codify, which is our internal set of top of stack applications around assets, networks, data, and payments. And below that, within our Pegasus protocol engineering team, we can do ETH 1.0 with Besu, and then as well as ETH 2 with Teku and Pukara and other products. And then on top of that, build on Pegasus Plus, which is our middleware plus support package, the commercial package of that. And all of these come together to support the top of stack applications, which could be white label UIs. It could be just use it as an API for Web3 connectivity of some sort. It could be a SaaS model where we're building the ability to abstract away some of the custodial aspects of tokens, but purely show it as an API. So a lot of these products, what John mentioned about the invoice factoring, or kind of having an asset that then overlaps with the supply chain product, I think that's really interesting. I love the global trade use case, specifically because these assets aren't just financial assets. They get triggers based on different systems along the supply chain, and then interacts with payments, interacts with insurance, interacts with data that relates to credit worthiness of the payers of those invoices. And then overall, it's securitization, right? So if I'm securitizing a group of assets together, then where do I connect it to in the secondary network? How can I bring liquidity to standard liquid assets?
And a real tricky part of that, Clemens, is unless you bag up about, say you're a big company and you want to sell your short-term debt, right? Your invoices, factor your invoices. You don't really want your competitors knowing how many invoices you have or how much you've got in trade, or that's a lot of pretty sensitive data. So it's often we talk about tokenizing and how and we think about ERC 721s and what have you, but if you think about what tokenizing really is, or what it gives you, it's what? Non-repudiation, assurance of consistency, right? That everybody has the same information. And one way to do that is to put it all on a single point of truth, which would be a blockchain, sort of blockchain as database or ledger approach, right? Everybody can see that one thing and know that that's the only truth. But what you really want is a consistent understanding of the truth. That would be a more nuanced way of thinking about it, right? Single point of truth being sort of a solutioning of the real requirement, which is consistency. And you want anti-double spend, right? You don't want to be able to double spend it or double count it or double execute it if it's not appropriate, right? Those are the things that makes a token a token. Is there anything I'm missing?
Accessibility and standards. So the ERC 20 standard, and even for the registry, the ERC 18 something standard that EY used. But those standards allow for that accessibility,
right,
and extendability. So
one way to get stealthiness on your invoice factoring on public blockchain, I think isn't our old friend at Centrifuge, Jason Jones, isn't he working on this where you can basically you tranche your invoices off chain, and then you put those boxes almost like credit default, or not CDS, but like mortgage-backed securities, right? You box them up into a tranche, and then you factor the tranches and rate them, and that's one way that you're destroying information there, right? Nobody can tell whose invoices are in that box. You just know that it's a AAA rated box. and you can buy a slice of it, right? That's one way, but what if you could sell an individual invoice in a stealthy way where nobody looking at the ledger other than your buyer knew that you even had an invoice to sell, or that you were selling it to them? I think that's where baselining comes in, right? Because you can take the baseline proof of the invoice, send the buyer the off-chain message with the record of what they purchased, and the only thing that the ledger sees, the mainnet sees, is that a hash moves from one place to another inside of a shield contract, via a 721 that's just packing a payload of a hash.
So if you're a manufacturer and you've got, upstream and downstream participants in your supply chain, you may take purchase orders from upstream, tokenize that invoice, if you will, or so that you can generate the funding to produce the materials, to buy the materials you need in order to produce what you're building effectively. That sort of pattern, yeah.
Without everybody in the supply chain knowing everything about everybody else, right? That's the importance of compartmentalization. Clemens, by the way, thanks for those slides on the stack. Would you say, so Infura is what, your gateway? If you want to get directly on the mainnet, it's like a load balanced access point to the mainnet, right? So that you don't have to set up your own nodes.
Yep, currently being used, billions of transactions a day.
Billions of transactions a day.
Yep.
It's crazy. And so
supports multiple client types, and IPFS. So if you want to use it for storage as well.
Right. And
sorry.
It's public. My team is helping work on gas services, right? So the idea of providing enterprises with the ability to pay for the transaction fees without having to hold crypto. It's another thing that is important. It's actually on the public roadmap for the baseline protocol team. And that's essential, right? A lot of companies can't hold crypto, but they need to be able to power IT transactions using the mainnet. So somebody has to be able to pay for that gas and then bill in fiat.
So I was taking some time to find the slide that I was looking for. Kind of generalized securitized debt platform, because we were looking at Figure and Provenance and thinking about how they do this within the real estate space. They obviously have focused on bridge loans and filling up that market, but essentially this securitization as a service is creating a new SPV. That asset's being managed by a fund, but it's essentially the loan data collected from borrowers and originators to create a debt platform. And the idea behind it is, if you can take care of all these, agent boring services, then you can, if you want to, create a pure platform for investors and either do direct investor, type of angel list style, or still work through fund management and brokers to provide them with ways to manage their subset of assets.
Sweet. Man, I love your charts. You always make things so clear. What else can you tell us about? So if somebody is setting up a baselining pattern in a solution with a number of big companies or small companies, what would they? They're going to need what? They're going to need a node or access to the mainnet, like through Infura. What else are they going to need?
Yeah, so this is just the simplified version. And if you watch like the EY presentations and kind of, was all extracted from public information, just kind of drawn differently. But in layer 1, layer 2, layer 3, layer 1, you have your node, either running your own node or testnet using locally on Ganache, or actually running Besu nodes, or using Kaleido, or using, just running a Geth network if you want to. On layer 2, you have to think about this peer-to-peer messaging service. So the Radish 34 used Whisper, which is just, they have their identities of those nodes and they're sending private information encrypted between them. As well as transaction orchestration, there's a lot of boring things that you have to take care of, like nonce management and guaranteed transactions, or maybe kind of throttle and gas as needed to make sure those transactions go through. And then other layer 2, the properties of data anchoring and attestations, of making sure that the data is being shared is consistent, maybe some off-chain privacy techniques, definitely the key management and signing using ETH signer as needed. And then on top of all of this, if you look at your layer 3, which is kind of surfacing the application, you have to think about the digital asset that you're creating, either fungible or non-fungible, representing your invoice or batches of invoices, to think about how to manage your workflow. So your state itself has evolution, maybe update of statuses, maybe transactions change it, or upon voting or agreement, or when you've completed all of the upload of said documents, then it updates the state automatically. All of these really have to do with the exchange and business process of updating this shared state.
Awesome. Any questions? By the way, this segment, last week we featured different stuff every week, and I thought it would be a good idea to feature some of these tools and components I should recuse myself and say my company makes this stuff, but that shouldn't be off limits. But yeah, I should say full disclosure, Consensus is a sponsor of me, and so, but it's good stuff. I actually would like to see the Pegasus orchestration team take on some leadership with some of these key components in the standard and the spec, because yeah, it's just really boring, hard stuff and needs to be done.
Yeah, this is the breakdown, and we've built this over and over again with Pegasus Orchestrate with all of the projects that we've done. And so if you dive deep into the estimation of work days that are needed, we've just kind of combined this all into a product, and it can connect to Besu as well as to Quorum. But the idea is to make this a repeatable function. And it's mostly for event streaming. Obviously, there's open source versions of this, like Eventium, which I believe Consensus also created at one point, but it's kind of creating it as a product. And
to Boris's point, right? Even this stuff should be pluggable, right? So if somebody wanted to use a Pegasus Orchestrate for approach for these components, as long as it's specification compliant, you can use whatever you want. Right. So I see that we're at the bottom of the hour, and Clemens, I only asked you to pop on for the half hour. You're welcome to stay. I'm happy to stay on for a few more minutes, as I typically do, to really get into more questions, and maybe the practical ones, like anybody. I always want to be careful to make sure people know how to be involved in the community and not get confused. So this is our weekly time to vet any of those issues, explain stuff. I can take you through how to get through the roadmap on the repo. I can share my screen on that. But Clemens, do you have any other thoughts before we move on?
No, I mean, the analysis we're doing is, obviously there's a lot of uptake and interest. So we're just thinking about what components can be leveraged from our experience of building out these enterprise grade deployments. So reusing some of these base products, so you don't have to start developing from just the protocol, but with kind of clear enterprise grade components.
Well, really appreciate your time. You're one of the best, and I'm not saying this just to be nice. You're one of the best team players in Consensus, and really grateful to have you around. Any further questions for Clemens?
Thank you, Clemens. That was very helpful. Yeah, thank you.
I see lemons everywhere I go. Thanks, Clemens.
All right. Okay. Other questions about other topics? Cole?
Hey, John, how's it going? Yeah, hey, guys.
It's good to see you.
Hey, so I think this might have been covered in the SSC meeting 2 days ago.
Yeah. Cole, do you want to say who you are and where you're from? Or... Yeah,
sure. Hey, my name's Cole Gendro. I'm just really passionate and interested in this space, and trying to learn as much as I can. I've been following a lot Chainlink, the decentralized Oracle project. So I'm an advocate for them, and that's kind of what led me to Baseline. Although it's really, I'm been a fan of the Microsoft suite of products, and so now seeing these demos baselining Dynamics 365 to SAP and Dynamics, it's like really cool. I'm curious how Chainlink fits into Baseline. And I think, again, it was covered kind of on that call 2 days ago, but even in Clemens, I think it was slide 15, you were just showing kind of in that layer 2, the attestation. Is that where Chainlink fits in that piece there, providing the attestation at that layer 2 level?
Maybe I'll quickly answer because I was just talking with Johan at Chainlink this morning. And I think there's a lot of really exciting stuff that's going to come out of the summer of work that they're planning. And I think there could be some really interesting connections with other companies that would be notable that I think they're already well known for working with. I don't want to say any more than that, but I was just really excited about it. The straight up thing is Chainlink is an Oracle provider. And if you're going to do, we were talking about code packages or code books before. Say I wrote a piece of Python and send it over to you to run, which you can do in the Baseline approach, right? You don't have to run it through a ZK circuit. That's an expensive way to do it, which is often appropriate and useful. But sometimes you just want to make sure that everybody ran the same code and got the same result. And that same result part for anybody that does distributed systems will step out to you, right? What if there's a time lookup in your code, right? In your function. And my system over here with SAP and your system over there with Oracle or Dynamics, I should say, Microsoft Dynamics. You're going to get different times in that lookup, right? That's going to make non-determinism happen, and you got a problem. So there's lots of places like that where, of course, market rate lookups and all that stuff, LIBOR, I suppose, anything like that, where you need to be able to get anything that's time-based or that's variable, has a lot of deltas in it. You're going to want an Oracle making sure that you are calling that, right? So in the specification, if you are doing some off-chain code, you're going to have to get that right, or you're going to fail every time. And that's where Chainlink can come in. So it's essential. It's not quite as straightforward or straight to if you're a system integrator, integrating things like SAP and blockchain, like Unibright and others that are doing that, Envision, LimeChain provide. There's a real clear reason why you're involved, right? Because the more baselining there is, the more SAP there is, the more dynamics there is, so it's a pretty obvious play. But with Chainlink, it's one step beyond that, which is if you've got logic in your workflow and it has anything that requires an Oracle, you're going to need one.
Yeah, got it.
Any other questions about that? Or Cole, I think I've seen you in the community out there. Are you okay with having an easy time getting into the epics and the roadmap and seeing where the ebb and flow of the work is going?
Yeah, I'd like to spend more time in getting in. I've looked at the Raj 34 demo, but yeah, I mean, it's pretty incredible how often you guys are doing these technical calls, and it's awesome.
It's easy because it's every week. It's easier for me at least to kind of do them, remember to do it. But just for this is the roadmap. We have a big high level. It's in ZenHub, and the name of it is Baseline Main Roadmap. We have two actual repos that are connected to this, both Baseline and Baseline-Roadmap. And you can, this is public, so anybody can see it. If you want to be able to actually put your name on a particular topic, like that Chainlink one. So we can go into the Chainlink, the Oracle project, right? So using Oracle's and workflow logic with Chainlink. If you say you wanted to be an assignee, to be an accountable person that says, I'm going to make sure this project goes and happens. I'm going to add, sub epics to this, and we're going to have issues, and we're going to have pull requests, and they're all going to roll up to this so that every 2 weeks the community can know that this work is continuing. There's so much work going on that this is a really good way to organize it, because I've lost track of everything that's going on in the community. So you can be, there's so many forks that even the ones that we know of. So this is how we kind of try to pull those things together into big tent poles. So in order to edit this, you need to be on the SSC. And to be on the SSC means your name or your GitHub ID is here on at least one epic. So if you want to be on the SSC, it's as simple as stepping up and being accountable for something. And if you are, then you're on the SSC. You're going to get the calendar invites. You're going to be on that call, and we'll ask you questions. It doesn't mean you have to do the work. It just means you have to be accountable for the work. There's kind of an army of people out there wanting to do stuff. You can get people to do it just by saying, hey, let's do this.
And so if you step back, this board we're looking at is specific to implementing Chainlink oracles. And right now we kind of only have one task in this.
This is an epic. This is the high level epic that gets surfaced to the roadmap so that we can keep track of it. And then the team is putting in sub epics, stories, and tasks, issues underneath that.
Okay.
They're getting ready to do that right now. And they'll use that one epic to kind of flesh out the ideas, and then sort of mitosis, kind of split up into more specific activities. Other questions?
Cool. Thanks, John.
Yeah, no problem, Cole. And by the way, I'll just make a note. Anybody that does want to get involved, really highly advise using Chrome and ZenHub. The ZenHub Chrome plugin really makes this work for us a lot better, because you can nest epics inside other epics. There's a little bit extra work, but so far we've found it to be worth it. So if you're getting involved, get the ZenHub thing. I feel like an ad. And you can get ZenHub. Other questions? Okay, I think we'll wrap this one for this week. Thanks so much for being here. And of course, we'll be watching the numbers go up on YouTube as people get time to watch this. Clemens, such a good time. Thanks again for coming in. And Nick, I'll copy these comments out and put them into the YouTube video link so that people can see them. I noticed last week that they didn't show up on YouTube.
Rock and roll. Thanks,
Right.
John.
Thanks, everybody. Magic Boss.
Thank you. Bye.